Sekeres Price for Monday, July 15th, 2024. We're coming to you from the Nation Network studio, built by Arbor Lee, here at the iconic Wall Center. If you're planning a boardroom meeting, gala, Wall Center offers 30 unique event rooms. Call the Wall, 604-331-1000. Matt Sekeres alongside Blake Price, Grace Sass hitting switches, conducting things. Big show coming up after a very busy weekend in sport. And we'll start with our poll question. Do big crowds make you nervous? Yes or no? You can vote at the Sekeres Price accounts, x.com and Twitter. And we asked this, Blake, after, well, an extraordinary weekend. My brother and I went and sat down to watch the Lions and watch the Copa match, Canada-Uruguay, on Saturday, and noticed that one of the stations had broken into news coverage and the apparent assassination attempt on ex-President Trump, and then a scare scene at the Hard Rock Stadium in Miami last night for the Copa final between Argentina and Colombia, where fans stormed the gates, breached security, got into the stadium. There was an hour-plus delay. Damage was done. And there was worries about that crush of people at the front of the gates, which, of course, had to be closed.
There was kids there that were being crushed against the fence. It was absolutely terrifying.
Yeah. Shades of the Hillsborough disaster all those years ago with the Liverpool supporters in the FA Cup. Anyways, the good news is avoided. Well, nobody died at Copa.
No,
nobody died at the shooting either. Oh, sorry, one person did die, actually,
yes.
At the shooting for president, at the rally for ex-President Trump.
Somebody on Twitter said, "I owe CONCACAF an apology. I wasn't familiar with CONMEBOL's game."
So I voted no. I've always loved the big crowd. I've always loved the energy, the enthusiasm, the electricity of getting together and having a shared experience with tens of thousands of other people. I got to admit, though, Blake, we were in Seattle for the 4th of July. We were walking around, a massive crowd there, South Lake Union, and the fireworks display. Intermittently, there were firecrackers going off. I know sometimes she squeezed my hand a little hard. I did the same with hers, and you saw parents sort of rubbernecking a little bit. First time I think I've ever sort of experienced a little bit of apprehension with a big crowd was just a week and a half ago in Seattle. But is this a new reality of life?
Well, it does make you think about 2026 and the World Cup here in Vancouver and what the crowds might potentially look like. And it really is dependent on the games that you get as well. Some nations fans are a little bit more unruly than others, although they've been able to control things at Euro. I mean, we know the English fans have a heck of a reputation. But it's been a while since we saw wild scenes at a Euro, I think. Widespread wild things, that is. It's too bad because we often say with regards to the local teams here, in particular, the non-hockey teams, for the Whitecaps, for the Lions, it's a case of if you build it, they will come sort of thing. And that if you can find a way to get a bunch of people into BC Place to watch either of those teams, it becomes a snowball rolling downhill and a lot easier to get them back once they've had that experience. So, we're always calling for big crowds, and yet, they can be terrifying all at the same time. So, I mean, let's hope it's a bad stretch, and let's hope that we learn how to congregate in peace. And hey, it was part of that problem for the riots, the 2 Stanley Cup riots here. The congregation of large sums of people with a lot of emotion. And
well, it's funny. I was talking to an Englishman this weekend who said, because we were in England for whatever reason, outdoor viewing parties are like a big thing. Like even places that have indoor spaces will erect outdoor televisions so that people can watch.
Yeah.
This is something I learned just at this Euro, that the English prefer to, in the summer to watch their national team outside with big screens. Okay. And he says to me, how come they don't do that for Canada? And I said, well, they might do that elsewhere. And he goes, I've thought of a great place. It's right down there on Georgia near Beatty. And I went, oh, you must be new here. And he's like, what happened? And I'm like, that's where the Stanley Cup riot was. Right down in that hood. He's like, oh. Anyways, I voted no. Still love being out with the crowd, as the baseball song says. But yeah, probably a little more alert, a little more aware than I used to be.
I mean,
the big crowds,
I have enjoyed big crowds in the past. First of all, I'm a little bit claustrophobic, so it depends. Like I even at the best times, even if it's not a safety thing, I just don't feel necessarily comfortable anyway. But if there's enough space,
so you're not doing any more GA at concerts.
Yeah, I don't think I would do a GA mosh pit scenario at a concert. Although, I was like just a few rows up at Pearl Jam, and there was enough space on the outside of the mosh pit that were like where people were just comfortably dancing.
Yeah.
Like I'm just hanging on the outside a little bit. That's all.
Pearl Jam fans have found their level.
Yes. No, but there's a couple people that were going.
There was a time when the Pearl Jam show up front was
dangerous place,
a wild place to be.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Yeah.
Grady, what about you? What says you? How do you feel about the big crowd?
Yeah, I don't mind them as long as I can see like there's an exit path, that it's not all too contained in one area. Then I start to get a little nervous, but generally, no, they do not make me nervous.
See, and that was the downside of the Copa crush there, is that the people that were at the front of that fence, they were ticket holding people just about to go in, but then they were all security got scared by the other people that were at the back.
Once the breach happened, they closed all gates. So
those people were doing nothing wrong at the front. They were just victims of timing of when they closed down the gate. So they're there holding their tickets and being crushed against the fence. It was terrible.
More on that tournament and the other one over in Europe coming up on the program here today. We will start, though, with some Vancouver Canucks, because we've come a long way from 2011, baby. From the most hated team in the NHL to top 5 liked in the NHL. Fun exercise by Jay Fresh Hockey. He put together an exercise to determine the liked and disliked teams in the National Hockey League. So what happened is you went there to Jay Fresh Hockey, his account, and 2 teams would pop up, and you clicked on which team that you wanted to win in a head-to-head. People voted on more than 34,000 head-to-head matchups that popped up. As Jay Fresh explained, the only prompt was which team would you root for in a head-to-head matchup. It shows you 2 teams. You pick one. The Vancouver Canucks finished 5th. 59.3% of the time, people voted for the Vancouver Canucks.
Before you get too flattered and flip your hair, Canucks fans, I think this has more to do, and we've talked about this before, as to why Canucks Twitter just has an overall bad rap. There's just a lot of you online.
You have online proficiency, Canuck Nation.
Way more than I think any other fan base in the National Hockey League. You folks know how to log on.
You know how to vote.
So I think they just got a lot of Canuck fans of Canucks Twitter in that voting.
Well, the thing, and I agree with you, but also when I take a look at the top 5 was Colorado, Buffalo, San Jose, Dallas, then Vancouver, Jersey, Nashville, Utah, Edmonton, Winnipeg, Seattle. For the most part, those are reasonably inoffensive teams, right? Like, how many people actually hate the Dallas Stars?
Oh, yeah. But the Canucks are. A lot of people hate the Canucks.
Canucks and Oilers are the 2 that stand out there for me in terms of teams that are actively disliked. I guess the Devils are actively disliked from the New York side of the river.
But the Oilers have a very wide fan base.
They do.
So it's no surprise they can squeeze into the top third.
They can argue they have the best player of all time and the current best player, right?
Yeah.
So they bring a lot of folks to the yard. The least favorite, ABV, baby. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you, Jay Fresh voters.
And it's not really even that close, by almost
Vegas
3%.
At 33%. Chicago at just under 36%. Boston, St. Louis, the Rangers, Philly. See, those are hated.
Yes. Yeah.
And you get into the Blue Jackets, who I think are just hated for existing. Washington, Toronto, and the Islanders.
A lot of people hate the Habs, but they're right in the middle at 16.
Mm-hmm.
The Leafs are in the final third.
Yes, they are.
They're 24th. So that might help settle the debate once and for all. The Jay Fresh poll here.
Mm-hmm.
Who's hated more? It looks like the Leafs are hated more.
I think so. But Vancouver finishing top 5 and leading Canadian outfit.
Is there any other hated team that's higher than you'd think? The Habs are maybe a tad higher than I would think, but I don't think there's another hated team that's sort of out of place.
Yeah. I can understand the hate for Chicago and Boston.
Yep.
St. Louis, I'm a little more, but of course, St. Louis has a lot of rivals like Minnesota, Chicago, Detroit. Like they've had a fair number of rivals over their years.
And they're like, even their recent cup winning team wasn't a sexy cup winning
certainly
team.
Not. Certainly not. Yeah. I guess I'm surprised that the Islanders and Rangers are both in the final third and the Devils are amongst the most liked. I mean, tells me that
I think the Digitals have a
Jersey Twitter was
I think Jersey is a digital savvy crowd too, honestly.
Okay.
And the Flyers are old school Flyer hate. Good to see. Still alive and well.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of the Oilers, another NHL trade today involving Edmonton. Xavier Bourgault, a one-time first-round pick of the Oilers, is going to Ottawa for Robbie Järventie, who's a high second-round pick, one-time high second-round pick of the Senators. Edmonton, there's a draft pick involved here, but more in terms of changes to the Oilers, minus a full-time GM. Bourgault struggled in the AHL. Järventie has been pretty good in the AHL, so potentially another winger option.
Or go the right
Edmonton.
shot center, though. So,
well, is he a center, though? I think that
in the pros, who knows? But
right. He was drafted and people thought he could be a center. I'm not necessarily sure he's a center anymore. I mean, we'll see. And there's a draft pick that's involved here as well. With
the Sens had to forfeit the pick as well, though. So like they
forfeited a pick in Järventie to get Bourgault and a ECHLer.
Yeah,
and a fourth-round pick. So Edmonton continues to do some work. I was going to say the margins, but boy, McLeod's more than margins, right? Like he was your third-line center. That's a little higher up the pecking order.
But it's NHL salary versus guys that they'll be paying in the A.
Right. Not to mention the fact they had another draft pick, and we have talked about, by adding Matthew Savoy, the young one-time first-round pick of the Buffalo Sabres, Järventie, a pick here. I would suspect that Edmonton is going to use a lot of these young assets to load up for another Stanley Cup run after finishing one game short. The bottom line, I think some of these kids will be given a half season to show, okay, are you an NHLer? Are you not an NHLer? And if you're not an NHLer, I would suspect your trade bait as Edmonton looks to improve its team as much as possible. It is going to be quite a tall mountain for the Canucks this year, I think, with the Edmonton Oilers. They took forever to get their you-know-what together last year, of course, before ripping off, 17, 18 wins in a row, whatever it was. And I think they're going to be a little better in the early going this year. Might have a bit of a hangover still, right? We've seen that with Stanley Cup clubs. You play deep into June. It is a much shorter summer, but I don't think if you're the Canucks, you can bet on Edmonton being as putrid as Edmonton was through the first 6 weeks.
It's going to be interesting, Matt, to see how many Canuck fans fall into the rut the Toronto Maple Leafs fans have been in for the last few years because of the playoff format.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Gotta play Edmonton in the second round, maybe even the first round. Like if somehow, and you never know when these things are going to happen. Maybe Vegas just makes another couple trades or something and is spectacular. They win the division, and then you're facing Edmonton in the first round. But as it stands, I think we probably all expect them to at least have to face Edmonton in the second round.
Yeah.
And such is life when there's a juggernaut good team in your division. You've got to take them on early.
That's the game right now. We have talked about a lot of whining from Leafs fans over the years about that.
The Bruins, the Lightning.
The fact of the matter is,
Panthers.
when you have a concentration of good teams in one division, and we've seen it in that division with those teams that you've mentioned, put Florida in there as well now, right?
Yeah.
That it can be tougher sledding. And we also know that this can be disappointing for the viewer because it doesn't always mean the quality of Stanley Cup playoff series improves as the playoffs march along. But we've also discussed the flip side of at least you get these great series in some cases in the first round that you weren't guaranteed to get in a different format, in a 1-8 format. And then, of course, some years we've looked at it, Blake, and the seedings and matchups would have been exactly the same in a 1-8 or in the
best thing you can do is be better
format.
Is win your division.
That's it.
Because chances are, if you win the division, you do get an advantageous first round series.
And you get home ice in the second round if you proceed to the second round and face one of these great teams that fall in the second or third hole of your division. Good on Barry Trotz. We call him Vernon's Barry Trotz.
Yeah, you can.
Vernon's Barry Trotz. He joined TSN Overdrive on Friday. Now, of course, GM of the Nashville Predators, once the longtime coach of the Nashville Predators. He got asked about being in Tennessee in one of these no-income tax jurisdictions. Quote, "It is an advantage because your dollar goes a little bit farther. There's no question." Trotz went on to explain that top players. He gave the example of Steven Stamkos and went, look, a guy like Steven Stamkos, he's just looking to win. He's looking to sign with a team that he thinks can be a Stanley Cup competitor. Other guys, though, he called them the middle group. He thought those were guys who looked more to maximize dollars and looked more to these jurisdictions, Florida, Texas, Nevada, Washington, the Seattle Kraken now, where you're not taxed on your income and where you take more pay home. This is something that and look, it is very difficult to legislate, but this is something that has become a growing concern, I think, in the National Hockey League. Of course, the GMs from jurisdictions that do tax income greatly outnumber the guys who don't, right?
Yeah.
So we shall see. We shall see if anything can be done about this.
It's way better to have an advantage than to not have an advantage. So, for sure, it's better to have this advantage than not have it. But of course, it is not a blank check. Ultimately, it's a salary cap league, so you can only load up those teams are limited. There's not 14 teams in these no tax states, so those teams are limited, and their salary cap space to woo free agents is limited as well. Ultimately, some of the biggest fish in the sea came north of the border. Like Jake DeBrusk was one of the biggest fish out there in free agency. He was. Vancouver Canucks signed him. A couple of the middle priced value contracts came to Edmonton. Victor Arvidsson and Jeff Skinner are two really good value contracts. And if they were looking to juice every penny, they could have gone to one of these states.
And that's fair, Blake, but Gensel signed in Tampa. Montour signed in Seattle. So two of the bigger fish also signed in the non-taxed jurisdictions. Look, we can play this game all day, and players typically choose teams in free agency for a variety of reasons. Right. Coaches and usage is usually really big as well. Who's the coach? How are they going to play me? Oh, they want to play me as a third-line winger? Well, this guy over here wants to play me in the top six. Or, he wants me to be a second-pair defenseman? Well, I know I'm going to play top pair right side minutes in that team. So, look, all of those things factor into it. I just thought it was interesting, and, God bless Barry Trotz. If you've ever been in a Barry Trotz scrum, number one, you come away appreciating the man. Number two, he's unfailingly honest. And number three, you learn a thing or two about the sport when you listen to Barry. Good on him for acknowledging that. Because it works to his advantage. That's right. And it would be easy for him to slough that off, downplay that, all of it. No, he owned it. Good on you, Barry.
Yeah.
Let's get to our top story, brought to you by Yellow Dog Brewing, Neighborhood Brewing, Yellow Dog Spirits, Foolish Winery. winning weekend for Vancouver teams, and impressively so. The BC Lions 35-20 in the first place showdown at BC Place against the Saskatchewan Roughriders before 30,083 fans. They vault to first place in the West, a CFL best 5-1. They've won 5 consecutive games after dropping that opener in Toronto. Vernon Adams with 451 yards passing. He accounts for 2 TDs, 1 on the ground. He throws a couple picks here. But our guy, Justin McInnes, and we had Justin on the show last week, and Blake and I have been a fan of this guy since we saw him suit up for the Leos last year in preseason. A staggering 14 catches on 14 targets. He caught every ball thrown his way.
That's crazy.
For 243 yards and a touchdown. I mean, we talked to him yesterday or last week, Blake, about, hey, is there any friendly rivalry going on in terms of you and Alexander Hollins and the receiving lead in the Canadian Football League after you both have monster games? Because, of course, Hollins had a monster game earlier in the year, and then McInnes had one last week, and he goes, yeah, there's a little bit of a, I told him I'm coming for him a little bit. Well, McInnes now leads the Canadian Football League with 725 yards receiving. It's 5 touchdowns, also tied for the lead. Alexander Hollins is second with 656 yards receiving.
And this is all with banged up seasons for Cotoy and Hatcher. Like they could be.
Well, maybe that's it. McInnes leads in catches with 45. Hollins is 38. In fact, Tyson Philpott, British Columbian, is right there in the mix with them, the receiver for the Montreal Alouettes. We talked about how that Lions defensive front at defensive tackle was missing some players, and Christian Covington lists as a back. They get 4 sacks. They cause 4 turnovers. Sean White, Mr. Perfect on 7 field goals. He is up to 39 consecutive field goals made. And I reached out to Matt Baker. I'm like, what's the record? Forgot. You remember Lewis Ward several years ago with?
I don't.
69 in a row. So
really,
White's barely halfway there.
That's absurd.
It would be a hell of a season if he could get to 69 consecutive field goals, or a hell of a run if he can get to 69 consecutive field goals. We'll see if he'll even have the opportunity to kick 30 more field goals as the season goes along. Anyways, huge win for the Lions. They're off to Calgary to face the Stampeders, feeling really good about this team. They got a bye coming up, and they got 3 consecutive road games here. So they've built themselves a nice cushion if there was a stumble anywhere along the CFL road. And then there's the Whitecaps.
Speaking of road games.
TCB, baby, taking care of business in St. Louis, 4-1. Now, this was a side who came here last month, scored the opening 2 goals. You thought it would be one of these Whitecap stinkers. Whitecap's going to Whitecap. They come back with 3 goals from Brian White to win that game. And Saturday, they just obliterate St. Louis. This game was not close.
12 goals now in their last 4 matches. They've played so many road games lately, from Victoria to St. Louis to New England and everywhere else in between. And they get 2 more goals from Brian White. He's up to 12 now on the season. Goal contributions, 2 more assists for Ryan Gauld, who's had 2 assists pulled off the board. So he's at 9-9 on the season now, 9 goals, 9 assists. He should be at least 9-11. They pulled off the board for no reason. So some of these statistical grievances we've had with the National Hockey League, same thing with Major League Soccer. But as it stands, Whitecaps now rise to 4th in the conference in points per game, and they've got 2 games in hand on the teams. Theoretically, if they win the 2 games in hand, and these next 2 games, which are not going to they're not going to be fully in hand because the other teams are playing these next 2, but these next 2 are very winnable. It's Kansas City and Houston next. If they won those 2 games as their quote unquote games in hand, they'd be 2 points back of first place.
Except they don't have games in hand against everyone, or 2 against everyone. They have
not against LAFC, for instance. No,
not against. And in fact, they have the same number of games as Houston. But yeah, they remain stuck in the middle of the Cascadia sandwich at 6th place. in the MLS West. They're 1 point behind Portland, but they do have 2 games in hand on the Timbers. They're 1 point better than Seattle, and they have a game in hand over the Sounders. It's Wednesday against Kansas City and then Saturday against Houston, and both of those games here are at BC Place.
That's the other context here, is that they've played fewer home games than anybody else in the conference.
Right.
So, their 6 wins on the road is by far the most in the West. Nobody's got 5. Oh, sorry, one team's got 5. LA Galaxy got 5. But it is now the 3rd most road wins on the season, but there's 2 juggernauts in the East that ran away.
And the other thing is, while Seattle, Portland, and many of the mid-table sides won this weekend in MLS play, a lot of the teams at the top, LAFC, Real Salt Lake, LA Galaxy, they all lost, which
come down a bit.
Basically keeps the Caps in it a little longer in terms of moving up the pecking order and maybe getting into the top 4.
They're intrinsically not
MLS
better
West.
Than Salt Lake and LAFC, I don't think. Like I
think those teams are just flat better
than
Vancouver.
They're just flat better.
Well,
I think
LAFC would be quite a
especially with Giroux coming. So, but if you get to 3rd in the conference, you buy yourself at least 1 round of rest, and maybe there's an upset along the way. If you get to 3rd in the conference, there's a chance you get a couple of rounds in a row against clearly inferior opponents and some home field advantage as well. So quite a summer inside BC Place, and it's been a long time. Hey, it was a long time since we saw Canuck playoff success and got to cheer that on. It's been a long time since both tenants at BC Place have been very, very good.
Last year they were both very good.
They were both.
I would argue last year
they were both. They were both 7 out of 10s, 8 out of 10s.
It's been 2 straight years here where we have seen improvement in both franchises, and oftentimes winning games and winning games entertainingly as well.
But I think both have a chance to take another step even still from last season and be, out and out favorites come the playoffs. Neighborhood has released Be Cool Lemon and Ginger Berliner Style Weisse beer. They made a classic Berliner Style Weisse with tangy lemon and zesty ginger to create a tart yet refreshing brew. Go check it out. It's a throwback coming out of the Neighborhood Vault. Just be cool about it. That's what it's called.
I was looking forward to a win in Berlin yesterday. Would have been the best victory there since 1945. Alas, it did not come to pass for England. But let's start with Canada. 4th place in the Copa. A thrilling match against Uruguay. Like, sitting there watching it with our group, we couldn't believe how up and down they were willing to go with Uruguay.
Yeah.
2-2, they lose it on penalties 4-2. Sadly, Kone and Davies, maybe their 2 best players, both miss. I cannot for the life of me understand the defending that allowed that Uruguay tying goal at the death. The goals Canada got were sensational. I was ready to absolutely tear a strip off Jesse Marsh today because the lineup that he dressed.
And in the end, ultimately, the closing lineup more closely resembles the starting lineup in the tournament, and they're the ones that gave up the tying goal.
Yeah, and missed the penalties.
Yeah.
But Uruguay has guys on the pitch from PSG, Real, Liverpool, Man U, Atletico, Tottenham.
Against Whitecaps, CF Montreal.
Jesse Marsh goes to Minnesota United for his keeper and striker as Dane St. Clair comes in for Crépeau. Give that group credit, though. Man, did they play hard. They played so very hard. Like, you could tell they had many more opportunities that they finished. We have talked about that for the last several weeks. That's the difference between world class and what Canada is right now is you're going to get those opportunities and they're not going to get finished. Oftentimes when you start finishing more of those, then you feel better about your chances of winning tournaments like this. Jesse Marsh, we didn't win enough for how we played. We have to figure that out, but we will. Of course, extraordinary work from the new Canadian skipper. He has only been there but weeks. I mean, people were petrified that this tournament could be a disaster for Canada, given how little time they would have.
That's right.
With their new manager. Alphonso Davies, the former Whitecap, quote, coming this far is an achievement that will live with us forever. I sure hope this is the end of moral victories around fourth place. I understand what he's saying, but I still hope this is the end of moral victories around fourth place, because let's face it, a third place against Uruguay would have been an extraordinary achievement for Canada. I have trouble with fourth place as an achievement. I understand what he's saying. I understand what many in the soccer community are saying, that this is progress, and it is. It's still off the podium, and the game was there for the taking. You were up late. You need to close that one out.
Well, I'll say that, of course, this kind of result wouldn't have happened in a different tournament, because you play extra time in any other tournament. Euro, World Cup, you're playing extra time. Who knows? Maybe Canada.
Do you think that would have been advantage Canada, or do you think that would have been
well, again, given that you got your true opening lineup now on the pitch, I mean, maybe it would have been. I don't know. And the guys that they were putting in, like Luis Suarez, they were only going to get more fatigued as another half hour of soccer progressed. So, I mean, who's to know? But I'm saying it just doesn't go down just like that in any other tournament. So, flaw of the tournament to some degree there, and to know what exactly. Now you can make the argument for the Venezuela result. Maybe Canada doesn't get through with that, but they were the better team on that night too. So I think the fact that they just showed so well that it wasn't by the skin of their teeth in terms of their own performance that they made this progress, that it was by playing amongst the prettiest football at the tournament that they got to where they were, is a step in the right direction. And goal scoring, yep, that's certainly the Achilles heel right now. It's not necessarily because of personnel. Ask the Belgians and Romelu Lukaku about, the ability to finish. You can have pedigreed goal scorers there that just for whatever reason can't score on their national shirt. And it's a tough criticism for a guy like Jonathan David, because he has periodically scored against big teams. He's more notably scored against the Minnows. But he needs to find a way to make himself seen in the big matches if he's going to be the striker going forward. And if not, time to start to develop those other guys. Theo Baer is on his way to the French league now. These are players that are going to get way better experience, and hopefully they rise to the occasion. And it doesn't always end up that way. Like Tejan Buchanan, he didn't play a whole lot of soccer this year for Inter Milan. You look at Gio Reyna's experience in Germany, the American. If you don't play, you're not developing. You got to find a way to develop.
I was pleased to see David get a goal from open play, though.
Yeah.
As I said to you going into the weekend, David has to play. Whether you want to try something else up front at striker with a different two-man alignment up there, where you want to try a different single strike, whatever the case may be, you have to play David, because the likelihood that you're going to find a striker better than David in the next 2 years before the 2026 World Cup is not all that high. So you're riding with this guy. He had a tough tournament. You got to find a way to get more out of him, and hopefully he gets one and gets some confidence out of this. Sure enough, he does. As for the final, the disaster at Hard Rock Stadium, and look, Jesse Marsh was amongst the voices to absolutely pen this tournament. He said Canada was treated like second-class citizens. He called out the physical play, the racism, the diving. He said referees were biased versus the CONCACAF teams.
I love the quote. This was not a professional tournament for me.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. This was not a professional tournament for me. This is the oldest tournament, by the way, at this level on the planet. It's older than Euro and the World Cup.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's why you want Canada to be a part of it. But my goodness, did they have to figure it out.
This was on the heels of Uruguayan coach Marcelo Bielsa, who went on an absolute tirade against this tournament. He even said, I told myself I'm not going to get into this, and then went on to laundry list grievances based on this term, was even laundry listing grievances from other teams. Said Bolivia couldn't train, and you guys don't care because it's Bolivia, but that matters.
It was a great quote.
He went on, he took on reporters, said some of you are more willing to be sympathetic to the power brokers that make the money
He's right
flow.
there. He's right
he
there.
shit on the field conditions that they had to play with seams and the bounce of the ball in certain areas. He shit on the training field and the conditions there, on the security or lack thereof with the Colombian fans and the Uruguayan players getting into it. So nobody seemingly outside of Argentina, I think, was happy about this tournament. And the Argentines win. They defend their Copa championship 1-0. Sadly, Messi has to be subbed off with what looks like a turned ankle, and that could be the end of his international career. It may also take a while before he returns to MLS play with Miami. You take a look at that ankle. And Colombia falls just short. They were game, but vanquished at the end.
I have the solution, by the way, if you're interested.
What's that?
To all this problem, to the issue of competitive games for Canada going forward. No more Common Ball, no more CONCACAF.
Just one big federation?
One big federation. You rebuild it. You call a spade and say that wasn't organized well. CONCACAF is ridiculous. I was just looking ahead to Nations League. Canada's most meaningful games now are not until November. They jump straight to the quarterfinals of Nations League. But you look at who's in CONCACAF, like, come on. You're asking Canada to go back to the likes of playing Suriname and French Guiana.
So I'll take this on, Blake, in terms of Mexico is really down now. Mexico is not usually
they're part of the
bad.
party. They're part of the party.
The USA had a shockingly bad tournament, but they're better than what they showed as well. There are other CONCACAF teams. I mean, Costa Rica comes to mind.
Yeah, Panama's fine too.
Panama, Jamaica at different times has been good. So, yeah, I understand.
But
there's minnows everywhere, Blake. There's, wherever you go, you're going to find some.
But Matt, in Europe, you're on the 2015 before you get to a true minnow.
Fair enough.
Because they were great teams that weren't at Euro.
Alas, we're not changing continents. So
no, but I'm saying that's what a real football conference looks like.
But there's one in the world.
Right, but you can
everybody else.
But you can create one. That's my whole point here. You can create another European federation by creating an Americas federation where these teams, and it should be in Argentina. Given that Brazil is in shambles right now, the program, Ronaldinho washed his hands of the program.
Said it was the worst Brazilian team he had ever seen.
Right,
take to the field.
And the way these teams get better is by playing good teams. So they should want now to be a part of Mexico, Canada, and the United States. It's 3 more good teams for them to face. So
I don't disagree, but like we're riding high on the hog now. Like we could be down in a few years, Blake. Like I know everyone thinks the Canadian soccer project's taking off, but hey, Alfonso Davies is a Liberian who came to Canada via a refugee camp. If he's not a Canadian, this team takes on a much different look, right? And there's a lot of other kids.
Immigration numbers are not going down; they're only going up in Canada. So those stories will continue to happen. And what you're doing is you're just raising the floor. The more games you play at this level, you can only sink so far. Like as bad as Mexico and the United States are right now, they're not terrible. They're 10th and 11th in the world right now. Those two teams in the FIFA rankings. So you just make sure that you're never comfortable. You're never comfortable and patting yourself on the back for beating Suriname 3-0. That should never happen again.
Messi may not have played in Vancouver this year. He is partnering with a Vancouver company, though. Did you see this story? Mark Anthony Group. Beverage called Mass Plus or Positive Hydration, they're calling it.
Okay.
Leo says hydration is important, and he likes the taste. No artificial taste. This is the same group that does those White Claw beverages. Anyways, maybe he'll make a promotional appearance at some point here in Vancouver. Or maybe he'll hang around MLS for 3 more years till the next scheduled match, Miami and Vancouver, and be sure to take the pitch here that day.
Or he just is comfortable coming off the bench for Argentina at the World Cup, and we just so happen to get him in the group here.
That would be fun, too. Hats off to Spain. They were by far the best team at Euro. They were a joy to watch. They won all 7 games. They scored goals. England made it interesting. Give them that. But alas, it's not coming home, everyone. It's staying away.
Yeah.
Still without a major championship victory for England since 19 66. This from Colin Miller of The Athletic, not our Colin Miller. Since May 2001, Spanish teams have played in 27 major finals. That's Champions League, so we're going club there. European League, World Cup, Euros. 27 times, 27 Spanish winners. Remember what we used to say? The old quote about soccer being a game of 22 men kicking a ball for 90 minutes and then the Germans win? Just substitute Spaniards for Germans right now.
Well, and it does. People will argue some people will, that La Liga is really the better league than the Premier League too, at the top. Like, it produces the best teams.
Real and Barcelona.
Yeah.
And then I realize some of the other ones, Atletico and whatnot, can occasionally get to those levels. In fact, some of these Champions Leagues that Miller is referencing were two Spanish teams playing each other.
Right.
So there's bound to be a Spanish winner. And it happens on what is an enormous day for Spanish sport, with Carlos Alcaraz dismantling Novak Djokovic for the Wimbledon title. He's 4-0 in Grand Slam finals, Blake. It's like he didn't have to learn how to win one.
And it looks so
Hard
good.
knocks, anything like that. He just stepped into finals and started beating goats. And outside of the third set, where Novak made it interesting, this was a demolition.
And it looks good on Novak, given the tournament that he's had with he's getting more petrified and
he was very gracious in defeat, though. I will say that.
But prior to the match, he was saying, hey, this kid's going to go on and win a bunch, but it's going to happen in 15 years when I'm finally retired. Making a joke, obviously, but
I think he knows he's number 2 now, Blake.
You think so?
Oh, yeah. Based on the comments, and he was very gracious in defeat. I think he may have some defense mechanisms there. In fact, the lashing out of the crowd may, in fact, be a symptom of what he recognizes, that he's no longer the best player in the world.
Yeah, deep in his soul, he might know the truth, but on the outside, at least, he's still going down
I think
fighting.
There's some preventative measures at place there.
Yes.
But I think Novak is firmly aware that this kid is now the best player in the world and that his days of winning Grand Slams are done. Maybe he gets another one at some point along the way where he has a great match or Alcaraz gets knocked off or anything like that.
Well, the other tough part for him is that he can't even be like, oh, I can win on clay. No, you can't. This kid will be on clay too.
Although this kid his best surface might be grass, which is odd to say for a Spaniard. We're so accustomed to them dominating on clay courts, which you see a lot in their country. But of course, Blake, the Spanish winning, it didn't end at football or soccer. It didn't end at tennis.
Mm.
Did you hear Sergio Garcia? Sergio Garcia won the Live Tour event in Andalusia, so home soil, and his Fireballs team also won the team event. Live Golf does team events alongside the individual. Sergio, quote, I might be wrong, but I think that if the soccer team wins tonight, it could probably be one of the biggest days in the history of Spanish sports. I would say Alcaraz winning, us winning both individually and as a team, and then the national team winning the Euro Cup. It would be amazing to have all those 4 things happen in the same day.
Yeah, so amazing.
It would be amazing.
So amazing.
One of these things is not like the other.
Yeah, we didn't know about your thing. Like, literally, sports is my business.
He was dressed in
it is our industry. I had no idea that was happening.
He was dressed in the Spanish colors, and to the I might be wrong, Sergio, we're here to tell you. You're wrong.
Yeah.
Can you imagine the front page of the Spanish paper?
Oh my God. Just
Euro, Alcaraz, similar treatment to Andalusia, Live? I don't think so.
No.
All right, let's get to today's menu. It is brought to you by Greta. Greta, a fantastic spot to catch the game throughout the season. Quick walk to the Rinker Stadium. Go-to spot, food, drink, fun. That arcade. Before and after the game, make it a game night at Greta. 50 West Cordova. We got Jim Hughson coming up here, the former voice of Hockey Night in Canada. He's the chairman of the board of the BC Hockey Hall of Fame. They have their huge induction gala on Friday at the South Okanagan Event Center in Penticton. Great to catch up with Jim, who watches all the games still and watches them as a fan and watched the Canucks run and was surrounded by Canucks fans and still gets stopped on the seawall to ask his 2 cents about the Vancouver Canucks. So he's coming up, as is Paul Dolan, after all of this soccer. Of course, Blake's broadcast partner with MLS on Apple as well, former Canadian national team member, coach. In fact, Paul Dolan has seen every Canadian men's national game for 40 years. Some of them from pitch level.
Yep.
Some of them from the broadcast booth, and others just looking on in. So no better authority to contact after this weekend that was of footy, and particularly for the Canadian program. Okay, Bet365. Bets of the day. This segment brought to you by Bet365, proud partner of Sekeres Price, and we're absolutely delighted to be working with Bet365 ourselves. I'm looking at some hockey futures, Blake, because for the most part, we're settled in here. There will be some moves to be made from here, of that there's no doubt.
Mm-hmm.
But you can now pretty much look up a team's depth chart and see, okay, that's likely what they're going to be heading into the season. And I know there's a lot of people who were bullish about this team last year. It just turned out they were still a little bit too young and still a little bit not poised enough with keeping the puck out of their net. I think the Buffalo Sabres are going to break through and make the playoffs here, end the longest drought in the National Hockey League. I'm getting a little bit of value to take them to make the playoffs. They're plus 160, Blake. So give me Buffalo to make the Eastern Conference field next spring at plus 160.
Early lines are out, so I guess they're not so early anymore for the Open Championship this week. Bet365's got some great
I love the golf props.
Pure hope bets. No, but I'm saying you don't need to pick the winner. You don't need to go top 5. They've got top 10 and top 20 odds for everybody in the field, basically. It's been a long time, Matt, since we have realistically cheered on Canadian success at the Open Championship. Like, when's the last time there was any sniff for a Canadian at the Open Championship? Considering we live in inhospitable climes, I'm surprised we don't play better at the Open Championship.
Yeah, well, I mean, we don't have a lot of links courses, though.
No, but you'd think if you know how to play in the wind and the cold on a park course, you'd think you'd be able to do that.
I'm not sure we do know how to play in the wind, though. Most of our golf is not coastal. Ours is, for you and me, here in Vancouver.
Prairie golf is very windy. Winnipeg calls its courses Breezy Bend, for God's sakes.
Playing in Ontario, Blake, I don't remember playing in a lot of tough winds.
Oh, I do.
In Ontario.
Angus Glen gets very windy. The ones down in the city, less so, but if you go outside the city,
I don't.
So anyway,
I
want to be able
to. I'd love to see it happen. Yeah. A Canadian competing at the Open Championship, sign me up. And of course, we're getting close to President's Cup picks here, of which Taylor and Corey Connors look really good. And Svensson, Hadwin, you'd like to see them get on their horse. By the way, you see Mackenzie Hughes got a 2-stroke penalty for showing up late to his tee time at the Scottish Open. Second time it's happened in 2 weeks on tour. The rule is you've got to be there 5 minutes before your tee time. And for whatever reason, I still haven't seen it explained, Mackenzie Hughes did not get to the tee within 5 minutes.
There's only one excuse that is appropriate at that point.
He slept in and got caught in Chicago traffic.
No, because you're getting there to hit balls anyway. So you're on premise.
Right, for sure.
There's only one reason. You're on the throne.
The Roberto Luongo.
Like, if you've got a case of the trots and you're on the throne, what are you're just gonna tell your system, hey, it's time to hit the tee? I gotta calm this down. No,
I think he went over there, eat some bad haggis or something, and
he was just stable to the throne. That's the only thing. Anyway, Connors plus 600 for top 10 on the quick.
Got a little off track with that pick there. Open an account with Bet365 today and bet on a huge range of markets. So whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Use code VANBONUS when opening that account. And not live on Twitter today or x.com. Have a fix coming. Anticipate we will be back on X or Twitter tomorrow. Jim Hughson is next. hockey season may be over, but it's always a great time at Greta.
Air hockey season is never over.
Right.
And at Greta, it's the best air hockey table around, but all the best games. So never mind waiting for somebody else to stage something in Vancouver for you this summer. You can stage your own thing. The fun is always there at Greta.
A quick walk to the rink or stadium. It's a go-to spot before the game, after the game. Make it a game night at Greta, 50 West Cordova, or at gretabar.com. Our next guest is chair of the board, the BC Hockey Hall of Fame. They have their huge induction gala Friday at the South Okanagan Event Center in Penticton, and we are pleased to welcome back to the program the former voice of Hockey Night in Canada, the one and only Jim Hughson. How you doing, Jim?
I'm doing excellent. It's been a great summer. It's life is good. It's a little different in my world now, but it's very nice.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how's retirement treating you? How much hockey are you watching these days?
You know, I still watch a lot of it. I mean, I love the game. I don't think you do what I did for as many decades as I did without a passion for it, without loving it. So I don't think a day went by this spring where I didn't watch a playoff game. I ate it up, and each time I watched, I thought, where would I be today? What hotel would I have to be going to? What time would my flight be? And then felt very comfortable in cracking a beer and sitting back in a chair and watching the game in my home.
I was going to ask you, do you watch it with a broadcaster's eye or ear, or do you totally disassociate and sit down and watch it as a fan these days?
Matt, the biggest difference is I can watch it as a fan now. And the biggest difference is that because I'm not preparing for another game, I watch it really differently. I'm still looking at what's he using on the power play and why has he got that penalty killing unit on and where's so-and-so because I haven't seen him for 6 minutes. I still find myself gravitating towards that. But the big difference is when it's a really crappy game, I shut it off and move on to something else. And, when you're working a game, good or bad, you stick with it because you've got another game coming up and you got to watch it. But now I don't have to. And I did find myself watching a little more as a fan because I'm never really in our world. You don't get to be a fan and have a favorite team. There's lots of favorite teams because I always like the best teams. I like watching really good teams, and I still feel that way, but never as a fan. And now I found myself really rooting for the Vancouver Canucks when they were in the playoffs because the community around me was so invested and everybody's excited about it. Everybody on the block is excited about it. And I'm still stopped every time I go out for a run or a walk on the beach or I'm out with my dog and I'm asked to be the analyst because of what I did. So I keep up with it, and everybody thinks it's my fault when they lost and gives me a pat in the back when they win for whatever reason.
We all remarked on the awakening of the fan base because of the run, and Edmonton had a good scare as well, getting all the way to the Cup final. Do you remember the extra sizzle when you covered a Canadian team going on a run? And there were a few Canadian runs when you were the voice of Hockey Night in Canada.
Yeah, no greater than 2011, of course. I still have really, really, really great memories of that in some ways. That was really different because I found that as a broadcaster, and everybody knew that I was a Vancouver guy and that I live in the city, local people didn't think I was a big enough fan. And the other guys thought I was too much of a fan. So it's really to win that. And like with I broadcast the Maple Leafs, one of the downsides of having the top chair in Hockey Night in Canada is basically become a Toronto Maple Leaf broadcaster because you're there every Saturday, whether they're good or bad. And as the years have gone by, I've noticed a real change in fandom. And part of it is social media, I think, but it's just the way everybody in a local fan base expects their broadcasters to be like them. They want fans. And if you're not, you must hate them. And that's the problem you get when you're broadcasting on the national level out of Toronto, is that they want a local broadcast, but at the same time, the broadcasters are broadcasting to every corner of the province. And there's, you might be broadcasting a game where the New York Islanders playing, and the young men who play for the Islanders are from all different parts of Canada as well, and their people are invested in it. So it's really a hard one to win in that sense. And now you get judged every day on social media, or every minute on social media, which has changed the aspect of broadcasting for the guys that are still doing it entirely.
You got out at the right time, old friend. Your timing was exceptional. At the risk of being one of these well-wishers on the seawall, what did you make of the Canucks this year, Jim Hughson? What do you make of the future of this club?
Well, it's the future is better, and probably better sooner than I thought it was going to be. It turns out they had some better parts than I thought they had. I think we probably all are in the same boat. And the wonderful thing about hockey is it is the sum of its parts. It's such a team game that you don't have to have the best players, but you don't win unless you have a team and you play together. And that's what I saw. They seem to like it in Vancouver again. They seem to like their coach for a change. They invested in what Rick Tocchet wanted them to do, and they looked in harmony. They looked in harmony as they got into that playoff run. So I found that they had some better parts than I thought, and some guys that are obviously going to stick around. And they have a chance, I think, to be just as good. I liked what they did in the summertime in terms of retooling, in terms of where they spent some of their money. And one of the things that they did that stood out for me in the playoffs was they caught on to what most of the league has now, in that you don't win unless you've got some big stud defensemen with a long reach that can terrify people. And that had sort of gone away from the NHL. It's back, and they were good at it. They surrounded Quinn Hughes with people like that. And then if you watch the draft, you notice that just about every defenseman that was selected, and there were a lot of them, was 6'5", 200 pounds. So the whole league is going back in that direction, and the Canucks were a little ahead of that game. So, yeah, I think, given the fact that Demko's going to be back, and he's going to have a more experienced backup now, I'm assuming it's going to be Shilovs. And then I don't see why they can't pick up where they left off and be just as good.
We were talking about Quinn Hughes a week or so ago, asking our listeners if he thinks if they thought he could get to 1,000 points in his career. And this is where we can pivot to the BC Hockey Hall of Fame now, because on the list of players, and he was still listed as an active player because his contract lived, Shea Weber did, you got to see how tough it is for players to get to 1,000 points, because you think about Shea Weber's career and you think about all the goals, and you would have thought, he'd be at more than 589 points, but it just shows you how impossible it is. Only 8 guys have ever done it, got to 1,000 points in their career, but it did defenseman.
Yeah.
It did highlight the goals for Shea Weber as he gets set to enter the BC Hockey Hall of Fame. I mean, just tremendous, the shot. And of course, we remember the size and tenacity as well.
So I'm with you, Blake. I was surprised when I looked at his statistics that he hadn't scored more goals, because he unleashed that bomb early in his career. And, you could fire away. And that's all everybody talked about. Shea was, he's a big hitter and he's got this incredible shot. Yet he didn't become a real prolific goal scorer. It didn't always get through. It got blocked. And that's probably what happened more often than not for Shea, is that guys got in the way of his shot, and he put a few guys in the hospital because of it. But it doesn't take away from the fact that he was right from the get-go, he was a really good player. And this is an interesting message to young people too. He was never drafted in the WHL. He's a kid in Sycamoose, and he got listed. The Kelowna Rockets knew he was around, but let him play as a 15-year-old in the Kootenay International Junior League before they brought him into Kelowna. And then he took off. He's 3 years in Kelowna, 3 straight Memorial Cup tournaments, 1 championship at home, and then gets drafted not till the second round by Nashville. And after a little seasoning in the minors, he was there pretty much as a 19-year-old and never looked back. But what a career. And for him to be recognized at the Hall of Fame in Toronto almost immediately upon his career to an end says a lot. He's a great guy and a great player. And it's one of the things I've learned about so many of the players from our province, and that's hockey players in general, I guess, but really humble, solid citizens and really good players. And Shea and Carey Price actually lead a new category for Halls of Fame of players who aren't really retired because they can't. They're still owed money. They're not retiring. But we recognize, and so did the other Hall of Fame, the big Hall of Fame, that Shea's not playing anymore. And he's also not going to retire and give the money back. So he's finished, and he's eminently eligible to be in the Hockey Hall of Fame.
With his height and
year for him, and
with his height and weight, he'd be a Vancouver Canuck defenseman, I think, at this point in his career, right?
So might Carey Price with his size as well. Jim, do you get to make the calls to these guys for the BC Hockey Hall of Fame?
I share it around depending on who it is. I had the good fortune to make a number of them, and it is so cool. Like we're a small Hall of Fame. I do think, as a pat on the back to what we've done in Penticton, we now have a wonderful display of over 300 cabinets that identify and salute the players, the builders, and the teams that have come through our province. But it's not the end of the world to be in the. Guys don't wake up as children or go to bed as children dreaming that they want to be in the BC Hockey Hall of Fame. But they do end up there when they're really good. And the one thing that has been really cool for me in the last few years is when I get to make a call to some of these people, that how they're so well decorated. And Carey Price is a perfect example. He's decorated, and we know him as, in his generation, the best goaltender in the world. But he was just very humble and thrilled. And so was Shea, to be brought into the Hockey Hall of Fame. And for people like Scott Bradley, who's in as a builder this year as a great scout, he was almost speechless. And I've run across that. People are genuinely pleased and humbled and grateful to be there. And we have almost, without doubt, 100% attendance by the inductees to our event, which speaks volumes of, well, who doesn't like a weekend in the Okanagan?
Right.
That's part of it too. That's part of the lure.
Yeah, you got some magic there in terms of the location and the venue. And for those who haven't been, and Blake and I go every year at Young Stars, the display there at the South Okanagan Event Center is so classy, so beautiful.
That's why I'm happy about Youngsters being there, and now training camp too, because that means traffic through all the displays and some great visibility for what you guys do there.
Yeah, we're thrilled about that. One of the things that we did during the COVID break, when the building was closed and we still had access to it, and as a group, the board that I'm involved with and the new executive director, who's now not so new, Pat Lawyer, came on board, and it was our goal to just fill the place, because we had like 120 empty cabinets gathering dust that had been installed when the building went in, and it just takes a lot of work to get that done. And now we've added all of the old cases that were in the old Memorial Arena in Penticton, where the original Hall of Fame was. We've moved them all into the SOEC. So we now have displays of over 300 cabinets, and they're all full, and they're all gleaming, and they're all lit, and it looks really good. It's really cool to go in there now, whether there's a hockey game or any number of different events that could be on in the SOEC, and find people just wandering the hallways. And we get calls from people who are in town on holidays wondering when it's open and whether they can just go in and wander around. And they can, because it's free of charge. It's in a public building. It's really in a place where it should be. And now it's been treated properly, and it looks terrific. And it's we also have the event there now, which we couldn't before. But on Friday, for example, when we open the hall at 5 o'clock, it'll be just all high tops, and people can wander around, have a snack, appies, have a cold drink, and just wander around and look at the cabinets for a couple of hours before we move everybody into a section of the SOE itself for the current induction. And that's worked wonderfully, but it couldn't have worked until we got the cabinets in the hall itself to be the star of the show.
Yeah. It's the 2010 Fort St. John Flyers. Scott Bradley, you mentioned Tom Cole from Vernon, Sekeres Price, Anaheim Like, and Shea Weber from Sycamores, Friday from 5 to 9:30 p.m. at the South Okanagan Event Center. Jim, people want to go. Can they go? Can they just buy a ticket and go?
Absolutely. You can buy a ticket. You can walk in and buy a ticket at the event. They're also available at the box office of the SOEC through Valley First. You can find them online. It's relatively inexpensive, and it's a fun night, and you get to a chance to rub shoulders with all these guys. And most of the inductees are terrific. They'll stand by their cabinet and take photos with people and sign autographs because it's casual Okanagan. It's 35 degrees outside, and it will be this weekend, I'm sure. But it's been terrific to change it over and have. We had to change the event because it used to be a huge banquet, but cost just told us that you can't do that much anymore. And so this works, and it's a great evening with a lot of really good stars. And so I'm really looking forward to this one because, hey, I remember as an aside, one of the questions we always get in this business is, what's your favorite game? What's your favorite team? Favorite game is a bit of an odd one for me, but it was a game in 2013, one of the lockout shortened seasons, and it was in the final, Chicago-Boston. It was a 6-5 Chicago win in overtime, and Brent Seabrook, who was inducted into the Hall of Fame last year, scored the winning goal. So I was telling the story about that, and for whatever reason, it just struck me as one of the finest games I've ever watched because it was 11 goals, it was overtime, it was in the final. And maybe that year, because everybody had so much time off, they had a little energy left by the time they got to the final. But the best team I ever watched play the game was the 2014 Olympic team in Sochi, the Canadian team. And Price and Weber were big parts of that. Yeah. Carey Price had a 970-something save percentage in that tournament against the best players in the world. And Weber was his usual self. But I remember watching that tournament and watching all the Canadian games, and at no time, even though they played in close games and even though they were tied at times and they had to go to, they had to have a little extra time to win some of them, there was never a time I thought that they had any chance of losing a game.
Yeah,
that's how good they were.
Agreed. And it's so crazy too, Jim, because like even the games against Latvia were close in that tournament, and yet you just had so much faith and confidence in Carey and that 977. With context, or 9-7, whatever it is, with context looks even better with the passage of
now
time.
We've got this silly Four Nations Cup thing coming up, but we are close to best on best tournaments again. Jim, are you excited about that?
Yeah, I love watching best on best, and I love watching the Olympics. You know what, the whole business of the Russian Federation casts a little bit of a pall over it because we all know that when they're part of those tournaments, how good they usually are and how important they are. Although, sometimes they don't do so well as a team when they get that group together. But that said, they're not going to be around, and everybody else will be. The only thing I don't like about the Four Nations tournament is that there's some countries that are really coming that probably in a best on best tournament would be involved and could scare the pants off some of the top teams. But they're not going to be involved. But at least it's a step in the right direction, and we're moving back towards best on best, and we'll get there. And it's about time because we're all looking forward to seeing the new young superstars in the game who haven't played best on best yet. And in Canada, we always expect them to be the best, but maybe we aren't.
Yeah, Blake and I talked about that last week. The USA team looks pretty darn good.
They're probably going to go. They probably should be favorites.
Goaltending, forwards, it's a really impressive group.
Yeah, there's a pretty deep group there.
Oh, wow. BCHHOF.com, the BC Hockey Hall of Fame website. Friday, the induction gala in Penticton at the South Okanagan Event Center from 5 p.m. to 9:30. You can get your tickets there, and you can go say hi to our friend Mr. Hughson, who will be in attendance. Jim, awesome stuff. Thanks for making the time here today. Much appreciated, and best of luck with the event on Friday.
Thanks very much for getting the word out, and really good to talk to you guys again. We'll see you in a rink somewhere.
Be well, Jim.
Mm-hmm.
The Vancouver Canadians are back at the net. Catch fireworks, giveaways, and Friday nooners all spring and summer long. Get your tickets at CanadiansBaseball.com.
Our next guest brought to you by the Arnold Palmer Design Whistler Golf Club. Off to an incredible start in 2024. Amazing reviews on course conditions, service, and we're reminding group organizers, 12 or more, it is not too early to book your September, October corporate and buddy outings. The prime times are filling up fast. Reminder, you, the group organizer, if you got 12 or more, you play for free. Tell us about your group at whistlergolf.com/groups. Joining us now from MLS Season Pass on Apple, where he works with this fellow. And, of course, former national team member and coach, it's Paul Dolan, back on Sekeres Price. How are you? Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you guys, too. I don't know if I'm all soccered out yet. I don't know if that is a term that I can officially be. But, the delay in that Copa America final, and then I just imagine the guys back at the desk as well at midnight Eastern, they must have been absolutely shattered. But it's been a good month, hasn't it, of watching football?
Crazy.
I can't say I've watched more soccer than I have over the last month, one after the other.
And we'll get to the Whitecaps eventually in this hit. That was actually the most entertaining soccer of the entire weekend.
It may have been.
And yet they get a little bit buried by everything else that's going on. So,
well, and especially when you get Canada-Uruguay was incredible entertainment. Paul, let's start there. Alfonso said, coming this far is an achievement that will live with us forever. Jesse Marsh said, we didn't win enough for how we played. We have to figure that out, but we will. Your overarching thoughts on Canada going for fourth at the Copa?
So proud. There was a group text or chat, a WhatsApp group that all the Canadian alumni are in. And I said at the end of the first half against Venezuela, that is the best first half of football I have ever seen a Canadian team play. I've seen every single Canadian national team game for the men's side since 1984, I'll say. And that was the best first half. The energy, the enthusiasm, the aggressiveness, the ability of the players. Schaffelberg was on fire. It just gave you optimism and hope that this team's for real. And then to back it up with the way that they performed against Uruguay as well. Just phenomenal, and even against Argentina, who are the eventual champions. So I was so pleased with the progress that the Canadian team made in such a short period of time under Jesse Marsh and what he's been able to put together in that short period of time, or at least get out of that group of players. And I think maybe the most satisfying thing was seeing some of the lesser named players going into the tournament really shine. That defensive duo and the center back pairing of Moise Bombito and Derek Cornelius, phenomenal. Schaffelberg, I mentioned. Ismail Kone. I mean, what can you say about him? Just fantastic. And you have to say that there's got to be a lot of optimism ahead just based on how they performed at Copa America.
I'm sure Kone would love that opening Argentina game back because he played himself out of the 11 and then got the good faith reinsertion back into the 11 after a substitute appearance that was better. And then he was spectacular the rest of the way. So, these guys are malleable. They're learning on the fly. They're going to get better here. And I don't think anybody had Bombito and Cornelius ending up in Big Five leagues in Europe on the bingo card at the start of the tournament.
That's it. They're all getting bought by French league teams.
It's absolutely unbelievable. Hey, close calls don't get you points in the standings or win you games in elimination rounds. But in wins and in losses, Canada was the most entertaining team of Copa, I think. Honestly, they played the most entertaining matches of the tournament.
I agree. You mentioned 3, I think, on Twitter there. So I'm thinking Venezuela and the Uruguay game. What was the other one for you?
Pick your Argentina game. I mean, fourth place would be Canada too.
Yeah, that's right. Well, that's it. Yeah, there were so many others. I think, too, that was a chaos tournament, right? Just the whole but Copa America is like that every time. It really is. it almost got scary too at the end of what happened yesterday in the final, with people coming into the stadium and didn't have tickets and all the rest of it. But the star of the show, and maybe it's biased, and I guess it is biased, but Canada for me was the star of Copa America, and the way that they played and the energy they brought and the optimism I think they brought to a lot of people as well. But it was fantastic to see. And the other thing that I was really pleased by is that every player had his part. And as you say about Ismail Kone, he played so well against France, and then to not play well in that first game, you think, oh geez, are we down to relying on Jonathan David and Alphonso Davies? And then Tajon Buchanan goes down and players step up in his stead as well. So it was a real squad effort rather than just an 11 that you're relying on, or even just those 3 or 4 star players that you hope can bring you through. They weren't necessarily the star players in this tournament, David and Davies, for example, in that situation. Yeah.
Well, I mentioned this guy on Friday. I said, if Marsh dresses a B lineup for the third place game, I'm going to go crazy, because we've got to win this thing. Who are we to say this isn't a big game? Looked at the Uruguayan lineup, players from PSG, Tottenham, Atletico Real, Liverpool, Man U, and Marsh counters with some subs from Minnesota United. Now, they played their ass off. Defougerol and St. Clair, I think, culpable on that first goal. They played their ass off. But given who was on the pitch, Paul, for us, and who was on the pitch for them, did we do well to get this to penalties?
Absolutely. But I love Taniel O'Shea. I think that's another player that we haven't spoken about, that no one knows about. Is just kind of, his star has risen in MLS with goals left, right, and center off the subs bench for Minnesota United. And then now he's a player that's called in, kind of the last player called into the Canadian team. And even though, yes, he missed his chance, the header for me, oh, geez, that was a fantastic opportunity. But getting into those spots, and the fact that he's been able to kind of get the faith of the coach to be chosen to start that game, again, I think there's a lot of upside there. But you're right, when we saw the lineup, and I guess more surprising to me was the Uruguay lineup. I thought they would kind of mail that one in, or think that they could beat a team that maybe Jesse Marsh would rotate, and ended up rotating. But they had to work till the very end, obviously, to get the equalizing goal, basically in stoppage time, and then to win it on penalty. So fantastic effort from Canada. And again, that full depth of the squad being used gives me a lot of hope.
Ali Ahmed too, with the service for that O'Shea header as well, right? So
Paul, you mentioned the fans breaching the gates at Hard Rock in Miami last night. There was the incident with the Colombian fans and the Uruguayan players going into the stands. Not to mention some grass pitches that didn't take hold, some training facilities that were subpar and unusable. Did you see
Marsh called it a non-professional tournament?
Well, Marsh, the Uruguayan manager, went on absolute tirades. Did you see anything here that gives you pause for 2026 and the hosting duties that will be undertaken by, I guess, mostly America, but also Canada and Mexico as well?
And I think you've probably documented this. That was a CONMEBOL tournament, not a FIFA World Cup. Now, CONMEBOL is part of FIFA. It should have been stricter, the standards, absolutely 100%. I don't want to say that it was a good thing that we had this dry run to see where the faults are. Why they made the fields all the same size for one was just crazy. I saw an image out of Orlando where you've got a beautiful soccer-specific stadium there that was used in the prelim games, and it was a dozen yards shorter and 6 yards less wide. It's just why they would have to stick to that one standard. I understand they want to have conformity throughout, but if the NFL stadiums can't have that width of a pitch or length of a pitch, that's what needs to be sorted for 2026. And I know there will be adjustments to those NFL stadiums in some cases to make sure that you have that uniformity. But above and beyond that, you got to make sure that the grass and bedding into those indoor stadiums, or the ones that are laid over turf, are going to be of the optimum standard. I've been told by Vic Montliani, who is working with FIFA, obviously, specifically towards, let's talk about BC Place, where we're going to have to see a grass integration system, a professional and the most up-to-date. That wasn't done in Atlanta, for instance. It was 3 days, I think, just a grass laid over turf pitch. So those are some of the things. I didn't know about the training facilities until I heard Jesse Marsh indicate that, and Bielsa said the same thing. So Obviously, those need to be shored up, but again, I'm not concerned because I feel like FIFA will absolutely be all over that, whereas CONMEBOL obviously let some things slip.
And we're going to see temporary grass for Wrexham as well when they pay a visit to the Whitecaps in a week and a half here. And we'll see, whoever is commissioned to do that might be a part of the World Cup, job to lay the grass down too. So we'll see what kind of grass that looks like inside BC Place in just over a week's time as well. Just on the game quickly, Lionel Messi has to leave at an hour, and that ankle did not look good. So he won't be playing for Miami anytime super soon. But is that the last time? Does going out like that make him come back for 2026? Probably not a BC Place, but do we see him in an Argentinian uniform again?
I could not believe the passion on his face. I knew he loved playing for his country, and I know he loves playing the game because aside from Vancouver, he really has put himself on the line. More often than not, he gets knocked down and he gets right back up, and it surprises me how often he stays in games when you think, geez, he's probably done. Like he took a hard knock when he went into the boards there and crawled his way back on the field for one. And then he takes the stumble on the turf, and you saw the size of the balloon that was on his right ankle. I don't know if that's the end, though, because I don't know if that's the way he'd want to go out. Mind you, to win 3 major championships on the trot after having failed, not him, obviously, but his team, over the previous whatever number of years he was with the national team, 12, 15 years, to me, it seems like the perfect time to go away. Like, why would you want to end it on something where you don't have as much success? People will only remember that he's won them the World Cup, that he was a Ballon d'Or winner, that he's now won back-to-back Copa Americas. I think it's the time to go. Angel Di Maria, he called it before going into that game. I'm surprised that Messi didn't. I'm surprised Messi was even back for this Copa America, frankly. But it just shows you how much he loves the game.
Let's move on. Spain, England. What did you make of the Euro final?
I think the best thing that came from that entire tournament, which I think started out well and then had tepid spots throughout.
Yeah.
Not great, exciting football, not a lot of upsets or high scoring games. But the best thing that came out of that final is that by far the best team of the tournament won the tournament. And Spain, absolutely worthy winners and a beautiful team to watch as well. I like watching this Spanish team more than the 08, 10, 12 cup winning teams when they won the Euro Championships and the World Cup in that spell. I just find their aggressive play, looking to get forward. Nico Williams down the flank, I love. Lamine Yamal, of course, the young player down the right side. What Rodri does in central midfield. I love watching that team play, and they weren't a defensive-oriented, safe team like England was. Credit to England for getting there. Yes, they were boring throughout many of the games leading up to it, but they were able to find ways to stay in games. And you get to a final. It's hard to criticize that, but Spain, absolutely worthy winners, and good to see that playing a nice, attractive style of football can succeed as well.
And finally, the pièce de résistance, the Vancouver Whitecaps go out on the road and stomp on St. Louis, put another 4 spot on them, and Ryan Gauld and Brian White are inevitable. They are going to score. They're going to score multiple goals on you, and there's nothing you can say about it. It's too bad that it was hidden because it was tremendous. I watched it on delay. Like I started at 11 p.m., I think, and I'm glad I did. It was a wonderful watch.
The whole Brian White story for me, having gone 8-9 games without having scored a goal, being dropped by the manager because the head was so far down, and for the redemption to come back, not just with a goal here and there, but he's filling the net. And of course, in conjunction with Ryan Gauld, who's just been like that throughout the entire year. And yes, there's always ups and downs for those two players, but the word that you just used, I think, is perfect. Inevitable. When you get those guys working enough, playing enough together, and you have the ups and downs, the ups are going to come. And the ups are there right now for the Whitecaps and those two players in particular. And you just want to see it continue to keep rolling.
Just quickly, they've got 2. They've already had a tight. They've already had a tight schedule. They got 2 more this week. They are running on fumes, but these are winnable games too. They don't want to see these ones slip through their fingers here at home.
No, Absolutely right. Sporting Kansas City, one of the worst teams in the league, although they've won 3 of the last 4, and then Houston right after that. But both
Who are
the BC
middling. They're
plays-
better, but yeah.
Yeah, they're better. They are better. No, they came back to tie their game against Minnesota. So Houston is a team I think that you need to be a little bit more worried about, but has struggled mightily at BC Place. And Sporting Kansas City, even though they're on this kind of upswing right now, for me it's all about the Whitecaps and their mental state. And yes, they're on fumes, but so are the other teams having to play midweek too. So should be 2 good contests. And I think Whitecaps 4th now in points per game in the West, have a chance to even push that a little bit further forward with some of the top guys dropping this week, right? All 3, Galaxy, RSL, and LAFC. I know they're a little bit away from that, but the Whitecaps right back in contention when just a few weeks ago we were wondering about that.
Fair shout. The mid-table didn't do no help, but yeah, the top of the West did not get too much further away. This is interesting with their games in hand. Should be a lot of fun. Paul, that was the soccerest month that ever soccered.
Yeah.
So we had to have you on. Thank you for the time, my friend. Really enjoyed it.
Anytime, of course, guys. Take care.
Hey, everybody. If you're enjoying what you're seeing here, then follow along with Sekeres Price on YouTube. I promise more content coming.
The kids call it subscribe on YouTube.
Well, how about liking it?
Do that as well. Smash it right now.